Hey everybody, welcome back. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at a photograph that I found on pixabay.com, and we're going to paint a dual eye study of a Black Panther. Now, one thing that's really kind of neat about this technique is that you don't have to fuss about painting both eyes exactly the same. What I mean by that is, typically when we look at a portrait of an animal, regardless of whether it's a dog, cat, wildlife, whatever, you see two eyes, you think, oh, they have to be the same. And really what you need to do is look at the photograph. Painting from life is always better, and painting what you see. So the face could be turned, the face could be down, the face could be up. So you have to adjust things. The beauty about a painting study, like the one we're doing today, is we're just going to be painting straight on so you can get the idea, kind of get the technique down pat of working with the iris, the pupil, and the fur, and the highlights especially. Let's go down to the table, and I've got this photograph that I found on pixabay.com. All you have to do is search for Black Panther. And just to show you that really all this is an oval with a little circle and then some highlight. It's nothing complicated. It's nothing complicated. So although I have this photograph here, we're going to be building on an existing line drawing that I already have. I'm going to show you a really quick way how to get a dual outline super fast. So this is going to be our inspiration here. I'm also changing up some colors. So for this particular, I may pull in another color, I'm not quite sure yet. The DecoArt Traditions Acrylics, Ultramarine Blue, Hansa Yellow Medium, Yellow Oxide, Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber, and Titanium White. So I'm going to be looking for more opacity in this lesson. And again, what I'm painting in this study, feel free to change it up. You don't have to copy exactly what I'm doing. I'm just showing you a technique, and which can lead up to another painting. All right, so the existing line drawing that I have here is this particular one here, and where we created the single eye study this way. By using the line as grid system, a really simple way is when we draw the eye on the grid, and then we turn it around, and then we add the graphite to the back in order to put this onto our surface, is that you can then take this, flip it the other way, and then trace that. And what you end up getting is this. Now I'm not going to go over the details of the grid. There's a video on that, a separate video if you have it. So I did this one, and then what I did is I turned it over, and then I did this one. Now what it does, it puts the highlight in the wrong place, but it's really hard to fix that, right? You just take an eraser and you just move it to where it should be. Where's my thing? And the highlight doesn't have to be the exact same shape. It depends on the position of the eye. So I'm thinking I'm just going to put it right about here. Okay? We're going to be covering this up anyway, so it doesn't matter. Even with this here, I'm going to be kind of not veering off, but I'm going to be changing the shape a little bit. Changing the shape just to show you how you can do this on the fly. All right, so I'm going to put that photograph up. I'm going to put that photograph away. And for this particular painting study, and remember, painting study is about learning, not creating a finished piece of art. Although you can take the inspiration from this and create a finished piece of art, just create at least 2 or 3 of these studies, changing up the paints just to see, and changing up the brushes just to see what feels right for you. And for the brushes, I'm going to be using the Majestics, and I'm going to be using, let's see, a number 4, 2, and 1 round, and then I'm going to be using a number 6 shader, so short-handled brushes. And with these, I may bring in another set, so I'm not sure. Now with this, we're going to be painting one eye because the other eye is exactly the same other than the position of the highlight. So use this photograph, the finished painting in this study, as your reference material. Well, with this, I'm going to basically go in kind of like the same way I did last time. So I'm going to get my larger brush. Use the brushes that are comfortable for you. So I've got my Ultramarine Blue, Hansa Yellow Medium, Yellow Oxide, Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber, Titanium White, and I've got a little bit of extender here. Again, working on unprimed paper, which I should have primed it. And I want to get in a yellow. So I'm going to start off with Yellow Oxide. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Now you can see my palette. You start off with yellow oxide, and I'm going to base that in. There's so many different ways that you can do this. It's just do what feels comfortable for you. And I'm actually going to paint the whole thing, because although yellow oxide is opaque, by adding a little bit of water and by adding even the extender, I can still see the graphite through it. And this brush, I don't know if you can see how that funny tip is? I think I may have to trim that. It's got a funny, that's just from use. I may have to trim that off. And I'm just, I know you probably can't see, so I'm just getting that there. Again, same thing as the last one, kind of going for an irregular pattern. I don't need to get anything totally perfect there. And I'm going to rinse the brush. And from there, I'm going to go now into Hansa Yellow Medium. I can do it while it's wet. And we'll just tap, 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 and start building the layers. And the reason why I'm doing this while it's wet, it just helps, again, build that modeling in the background. We will add white to this a little bit later. Oh, see how I brought that down there? No big deal because it's black. But if I had black there and I put, if I had black and I put black into the eye, that'd be a lot harder to correct because black can cover everything. But the yellows and that is very hard to cover black. Hopefully that makes sense. And then with this, well, while that's drying, let's go right into the fur. Now, I'm going to go to a different brush. I'm going to go to a little smaller one. And let's make a chromatic black now with burnt umber. I want to go for the more opacity with this. Now, burnt umber is, again, a reddish brown, but it's super dark. It's super dark. So this makes a even more deep chromatic black. Now, one thing that you can do is if you want to make chromatic black and you don't have burnt umber, you can take 1 part of ultramarine blue and 2 parts of burnt sienna. It won't be as strong, but it does work. I typically don't use burnt umber to make my darks. I'm going to start leaning a little bit more and experimenting with that because depending on the paints that I'm using, there's just too much transparency and I don't want that. So I'm looking at, and I'm just going to get that started. This is beautiful. And actually, what did I forget to do? I forgot to make my swatch. It's not blue enough. I want to make this much bluer. It's a beautiful gray. So let's do that. So we've got the mixer. I'm going to add more blue to it. And this formula of the chromatic black will work with any blue as long as that blue doesn't have white in it. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. So, see now this is now just 2 extra paints you don't have to buy. So this would have just been a dark or warm black and a cool black. So now you can make it yourself. You can use Payne's Gray as well if you want. That's no biggie. So a smaller brush, rounded, and just going to get that fur started. Get a little bit of water. This palette paper. I'm running low on this palette paper. This will be the only time I use this. This big. This palette paper I was using when doing my many years ago, my painting lesson. My mouth is rented today. My portrait. I was going to school for portrait painting. Maybe mentored by John Howard Sandon through his lessons and his methods of teaching. Put a little bit of extender in there. Now hopefully you can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep an eye on the monitor. So just again, the same touch, push, lift. Okay. And let's get something happening here as well. So I'm just going to basically building in the fur here. We'll just get that settled. So remember, you can load the brush, you can flatten it out a little bit, you get those hairs, and you get the nice pieces here. As I spoke in another lesson, you can get specialty brushes for this. Yeah, they're fine if you want to experiment, but I wouldn't go out of my way to buy them. So remember, a painting study is about learning and experimenting. So my experiment for this is playing with the color. But I do regret not priming my paper again. You know what's funny, because in the other lesson that I did, I said the same thing. All right. So you need dark to show light, so make sure you've got a good dark base that's not flat. Where's my Mr. bottle? There we go. Water always helps the paint flow. See, touch, push, lift, and you just build up the layers. I wouldn't leave it like that. Let it dry, come back, and then add another layer and add another layer. All right, and that's why when you create your painting, you never leave that hard edge. See that there? You need to work at that when it's dry. And this is the brow bone up here, which I'm going to have a little bit more light. All right, so that's dry. And I'm going to come in, I'm going to go to the even smaller brush now. Now, if you don't have anything to make chromatic black, feel free to use black paint, but then add a little bit of blue to it. And I'm going to now get that in here. Now this inner ring is darker than the fur, but we're going to be adding highlights to the fur. So you'll have that value change. And this is challenging for me doing this because, you know, getting older, eyes are not as good as they used to be. But with a painting study, that's the beauty of it. I've filled all that in. There we go. I can, with this, I'm going to thin that down a little bit. So it'll be much thinner, more transparent, because this is going to be a very light area. I need to finesse that a little bit. There we go. You know, basically what you've done here now, you're going to repeat that on the other side. So what I'm going to do is, while all this is drying, I'm going to now go to the other side, and it's just exactly the same process. So I'm going to start painting, and then when you go on to the next scene, it'll be finished. What I'm going to be doing as well is just filling in some of the dark here. Just using the large round brush and just putting something in. Still using the same touch, push, lift. Now this part here is very, very short fur. I'm not focusing on that right now because this is an eye study, not a fur study. But just basically to touch, push, lift, which will help build in between. And you would still layer it just like you would with the fur around the eyes. I ended up having to make more paint color wasn't exactly the same, but that's fine. Okay, that'll at least give us something to start with. All right. Now, let's go to the small round brush. And I'm going to, now I already figured that with the yellow oxide being opaque, I'm now going to have to get an idea. These eyes are going to be a bit more yellow. Yeah, that's pretty good. Blot the balance on there, and I'm just going to, so I blotted the brush, then I'm just going to scrub just to get a little bit of a roughness. You can use some glazing medium or even the extender on the paper first, then put your paint on so it's transparent. It'll be even. I'm looking for more of a mottled effect. If you have a little tiny round bristle brush, that would help as well. Now you can see that I actually went over the black. Doesn't matter because the black can cover the yellow really simple, really easy. Okay, like that. And then we're going to go into a little bit of burnt sienna. Actually, let me do that again. Rinse the brush. I don't want any white in that. Burnt sienna. And I'm going to do the same thing, and then you can see where the pupil's supposed to be. Just going to model that a bit. Then go right into some Hansa yellow medium and right on top. The thing with this is that it being modeled. That's the key. It being very, very modeled. Just a speck more of the burnt sienna. So really what you're doing is you're creating almost like a model thing. I'm going to go right over where the pupil's supposed to be. Very, very modeled effect right behind the pupil. And while that's drying, let's come in. Actually, I just can do, let's see, let me think. Let me finesse up. No, let me do the other eye. Only because I've got the paint already prepared. Oh, there goes Mia. Nice and modeled. Go into a little bit of burnt sienna. You're just going to pat that around. Go right into yellow Hansa yellow medium. The Hansa yellow medium almost acts like water, but it's not going to thin it down, but it's going to give you that really modeled effect. And then I could blot my brush, pad back over to remove a little, if I put too much on there. And I did. I put a little bit, see the big difference? And go back into that lighter yellow that we made. And I'm going to pounce, kind of like pad right over that. And then where the colors meet, you can just pat over that again. Because the eye has all those striations. So whereas the other eye was more of a golden brown, this one's going to be more yellow. Another color I'm just thinking that would have been nice for this would have been transparent red iron oxide. Okay, are you dry? Yep, you're good to dry. You're good to dry. Now let me try with this one. I'm going to make a little bit more chromatic black. Now the pupil is one thing that needs to be black. This is where I've always found myself tempted just to go into using carbon black. There we go. So I want this to be more neutral, But if it does end up being more blue or more brown, it doesn't really matter because we're painting it solid. Oh, now, oh, you know what I forgot to show you? Okay, opportunity. Let me just finish this. Don't paint your eye yet. When you get to this point and you, oh, I can't see the pupil, just go back in. And then when it's dry, just go in and then repaint it or redraw it. So you can go back in here and you can take your pencil and go back in and to make your mark, and flip it over the other way and do the same thing. Easy peasy. Forgot to show you that. Well, I made this one a little bit bigger. I'm listening to this one here. She's getting all huffy puffy. I'm going to shape that. I think I'm going to have to do a trim job on these brushes. I got some bristles coming out where I don't like it. So I'm going to let that dry. Yeah, I'm not liking the way these, it's just from wear and tear. Now, one thing I'll talk while doing this. One thing with your brushes is there are different springinesses on the brushes. Some of them are very soft, some of them are very springy, some of them are very hard. So if you think to compare, a bristle brush is very hard, the Majestics are very soft, and the Aquilons are about right in the middle. So that's one thing, is that when you're looking at your brushes, that's why watercolor brushes are always so soft. And bring that eye right up into the fur. There you go. You probably, I don't know if you can see that. See how this one looks more yellow? This is more transparent here. There you go. And that fur is going to be going over the eye, so I don't need to worry about that. And while I'm here, while that's drying, I'm going to take the leftover paint and I'm going to just adjust this a little bit. Put another little layer on there, because this is going to be where I'm going to be putting the fur, the lighter colored fur right around the eyes. About there. You can really see that this is brown now. Really see that's brown. All right. So now we're going to let that dry, and I'm going to come in and put another layer of the dark in the eye. And if you have a heat gun, you can do that. That'll speed up the drying time as well. We're going to go to the number 2, and I want to start building in a little bit more of the fur detail around the eye, because then I can start, building some of the detail inside the eye, then I can paint the fur. So I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to, you can get water or get glazing medium, doesn't matter. I'm going to cover all the yellow parts of the eye. I'm going to do the other side too. When you're using, I'm using extender. If you use extender or glazing medium, it not only does it take a little bit longer to dry, you run the risk of stuff bleeding into each other. So make sure that it's only the eye that you're covering up. If you cover up the pupil, because it's black, if you cover up some of the, some of the yellow goes into the black, it's easy enough to cover up. All right, so I'm going to go into, I'm going to take a little bit of white, make up another mixture like what we did before. So Hansa yellow medium and a speck of white. Some of you may have the color maybe as primary yellow. I'm going to take that, I'm going to blot the excess off of the brush. And the same thing, going to pad. And it's going to diffuse right into the color that's already like in the background. You're creating that glazed layer. Now, you typically when you do glazing, you don't add white. But in this, for this, it works out well. Then I take a little bit more white on the brush, on the dirty brush. And just pat, I'm gonna have to turn this. Pat on the outside. See, if this was done with water, the water would have evaporated already. That's why I like using the extender or the glazing medium. Now the glazing medium for the Traditions, it doesn't work well on dark surfaces. I don't know why. I've never had a problem with it, but on the bottle it does say that. But you can use any type of extender. So that's, you know, you can even use matte medium if you want. Love that. And I'm just going to bring that up a little bit more. Now I'm going to rinse the brush. Now, you really should dry this because now we're going to add the glazing of the burnt sienna. If you do the glazing of the burnt sienna and it gets into this white, you're going to get white into burnt sienna. But when we, so you're going to have physical color mixing. But if we let that dry, then add another layer of moisture and then put the burnt sienna on top, you're going to have optical color mixing, so the colors aren't going to mix together. So you just take your heat gun. Doesn't take long. Make sure your brush is really clean. Another layer of extender. So here's the thing. When I'm using this particular product, the DecoArt Traditions Extender blending medium, when I'm painting, basically when that's all dry, that product is gone. It doesn't leave any solids behind. If I were to use the glazing medium or a matte medium and add that, it would add transparent layers in between, making the eye a lot more luminescent. In saying that, there's a painting coming up where we're going to be using an actual barrier layer to create a luminescent layer in between all the paint layers. I really am tempted to go into transparent red iron oxide. You know that? I really am. Same technique, you're just going to pity pad. A bit too much moisture in there. If I go over the eye, it doesn't really matter. The pupil, I should say. See how that builds up? Isn't that gorgeous? It just dissolves into the outside edge. That is beautiful. What this also does is it helps with the shading at the top. It gives a little bit of depth. Maybe with the final painting, I'll use transparent red iron oxide. And if you maybe, well, why don't you just go and use it? Because I'm teaching specific techniques for these painting studies, and I don't want to veer off. Basically, I don't want to start with perfect or what I think is perfect, then whatever. Is I want to give you options for you to try because you may not have the same products that I do. It's unlikely that you do. So as long as the surface is wet, again with water will work, but you'll thin down the paint and you're not going to be able to manipulate it. I find that, you know, it dries too fast. Oh, okay, so I want to put the burnt sienna right to the bottom. Oh, actually, shoot, that looks really good. I'm looking at the other modder. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to put it over here. And I want to show you what happens what to do if you add too much. So put it there. And so what to do is to wipe your brush and then blot it on a paper towel. Then take your brush, touch it where you want to remove it, and blot it. Touch and blot it. Touch and blot it. See what's happening? It's actually coming off. Then go back in and blend the edges. And there you go. That turned out really, really nice. But I'm going to remove a little bit more because, again, I want to show you options. Always blotting on the paper towel. The paper towel just removes the excess. If you have a microscopic little mop brush, I have one somewhere. It's a tiny, 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 tiny little mop brush. It was a specialty brush that I bought, oh my God, 15 years ago. For a very specific technique. And I only use it for about a year, but that something like that would work out well. There we go. Back to the burnt sienna. I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. So now, if you're trying to get it darker than what it already is, you let it dry, another layer of moisture, and then you apply another layer of paint. Because this will only absorb so much, and you have to let it dry. All right, so we're going to dry this. I'm going to go back and do I have any more of this paint left? No, I'm going to go back into a little bit of the white with that yellow. Oops, you know what I forgot to do? Moisture on the bottom. I wasn't going to be painting the second eye once I did the first one, but if I make a mistake, you're not going to see what happens. Blot the brush and another blended layer, another highlight. I want this, I'm going to put a bit more white in there. Right at the very bottom, I'm going to turn this around. Right at the very bottom. And pad that in there. And doing it this way, you're getting most of the paint on the outside, and because there's not a lot of paint going up the brush, and that just fades it out. Like that. You're really getting the paint, oops, don't forget the blot. You're really just getting the paint on that outside edge. If you've done decorative painting, you may want to do this using a floating technique. I hated that. All floating is basically paint on one side of a brush, moisture on the other, and it creates a gradation. There's a lot easier ways of doing it than that. There we go. Just do it with layers. Layers and layers and layers. But the moisture on the bottom is what really helps. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to go a little bit higher. Now I'm going to be modeling, just putting a little bit of modeling in here. Nothing too fancy. Okay, just a little bit of modeling. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of burnt sienna. Do the same thing now, a little bit of modeling, a little bit more modeling. I don't want it to be this perfect, gradated. What's that? There's an actual term for the gradation. I call it gradation because that's what it's called in digital. Ombre, that's what it's called. A little bit darker up here. Now if I wanted to darken the burnt sienna, what can I darken it with? A little bit of the blue, could even add a little bit of the burnt umber. See how I'm going right over the pupil? Because I want to make sure that that's all covered up, because I can always add more black to it. Isn't that gorgeous? Let's go into a little bit of the blue. Still have a little bit of moisture in there. Blot that. Just want to add a nice deep shadow in there. I'm going to be the fur is actually going to be coming right into the eye. This is going to create a little shadow. Now, what's happening now is the paint is tacking up, it's starting to dry, and I'm actually lifting up some of the paint. So you know what time it is? It's time to let that dry. But while that's drying, what I can do is just now go back in and paint over the pupil. Just add a layer. And you're just basically refining. Smaller brush. So with this, there's a ton of different ways that you can do this. I just find that this is a really nice way to build your skills, to experiment with the color and a little bit of technique quickly. Because when it comes time to doing the formal painting, you'll have an idea about the colors that you want to use. You'll have an idea about the techniques. You'll have an idea about the brushes. Painting studies are all about experiments. That's pretty good. Oh, let's take some of that burnt sienna and go right in the corner. Just pity pad that. There you go. My blending medium was kind of dried out there. Not much in there, but there's enough. I just used a little bit of water. Here we go. Now all I really want to do now is I want to build the last thing for the actual eyes. I want to add the highlight. I'm going to do that at the very end, but now let's finish off the fur. I'm going to go to the flat shader brush, and I'm going to go into a little bit of white to really lighten that up. Remember, acrylics dry darker, so you want to make, you know, this layer, I would say 2 times lighter than what's already there, but you have to test it first. So when I get that started going right into, getting right into there, and it's going to dry, again, it's going to dry much darker. So you can see I created a few strokes outside here, and what that's doing is in case I have too much paint on the brush, it's only going in the fur because I can always cover that up. I'll bring it down. Hopefully you can see that. So using a flat brush is just another alternative over using a round brush. I find with this shader brush, have a lot more control, but it's easier to make mistakes. So go into the fur till you get that nice stroke, you get the pressure down right, and then you can come back in now. See, now I'm running out of paint. It's the fur is not as what's the word I'm trying to use? It's not as detailed. I'm gonna make a little bit more. And I'm going to come down here now. Same thing. I'm going to make this white part a little bit bigger because this is the part where it's the lower lid where it's wet. But we're going to be putting a black line around the eye, around the eyeball. You can also reshape the eye at this point as well. That might be a good exercise to show you. Yeah, maybe we'll do that. We'll reshape the eye. Because, why? Because I could pretty well guarantee there will be times where you're painting and you made the eye a little bit wonky. I've done it. So see how it kind of turns more gray? And let's put a little bit more here. Let's reshape that eye. So if you've done your piece and you're looking at it and go, oh, I've made it too square, I've made it too round, I've made it too oblong, it looks like a whatever reason. So just to basically reshape is you just basically take the color that's surrounding the area, and for this example, it's basically black, my chromatic black. I'm gonna make quite a bit of this because I need it for later. Take a little bit of moisture in there. Really bring that to a fine point. Then you can come in, and let's say I don't want to make this as round. I can come in. This is harder to do though when you're taking light over dark. It's really easy when taking dark over light. And let's just say I just want to flatten this out a little bit more. Now only do this if you want to. It'd be good practice, but only do this if you want to. But it would be good practice. My fear at this point is basically the eyes were fine, and now I'm manipulating them, and I could end up making them worse. So you start slow, and you build it up. Okay, and this one here, same thing. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. And do it slow. So see what I'm doing is I'm narrowing down the eye. And you can really bring that down right to there. See the different shape? You gotta do it slowly though. Okay, so I'm gonna do the other side. When you're doing the other side of the eye, you may find it more comfortable doing it upside down because your brain goes into right brain mode. And it's not so much the analytical. Okay, see what I did? Ridge of paint. I didn't blot my brush. So, I'm going to gently try to take some of that paint away there. There we go. So it's just a great way to reshape the eye. But now the eye is too small. What do? Well, you can take your brush and just push back into the paint. Wet it and push it back. And that'll help remove some of the paint. I didn't plan this really. So you're just removing. Dip into your brush, blot. Push outwards, blot, dip into your brush, blot. And really what you're doing, you're just bringing it back to the way it was. As long as it's still damp. Okay, as long as it's still damp. If it's dry, what do? Well, you can go back in now, especially for this one with the yellow and the white, and you add that back in. It's easy when you've got the white. Same technique. Just going right into this part here. There will be times where you just can't. There will be times where you just can't, and then it comes down to the point of starting over. Okay. Now when you've done the reshaping, then you can go back with your brush. Let's get some white in there. And just add your detail, just to kind of, you can't just leave it like that. gotta finesse it. Now the furnace just came on. You know, finding the painter drying a little bit too fast. I'm gonna have to go back in and start using some of that extender. There we go. Now when you put the light in here, see how I put all that light in here? We're not going to leave it like that either. We're going to go in and we're going to add some more dark. And when you're creating your paintings of wildlife, that's the key, is the more layers, the better, because you're creating so much fur. I can go into the dark now. A little bit of water. Come on. Oh, it's dry. There we go. I've got a terrible glare. It's making it very difficult for me to see what I'm doing. I'm going to turn this a little bit. Hopefully you can still see. Now, if you've got all these nice layers in here with the white, you've got some nice strokes, make your paint a little bit more transparent, the darks. So when you overlap it, you're still going to see some of that light showing through. The light strokes, you're not going to cover everything up. Right? So you just build it up and build it up and build it up. Another strong color could have been Halo Blue. I'm always going in, double checking. So it's neutral. I need more blue in that. Wipe the brush. So if you find that you're, and if you're looking for a opaque black, you're not getting it with your paints, then by all means go into your chromatic black and just add blue to it. Look how black that is. But because the blue is transparent, that's where you're going to get stuck with your chromatic black. It's transparent. Making a good amount here. All right. Yeah, let me go back to the flat brush. I didn't do enough technique with that one. Going in now, I'm just going to add some of this fur detail with the darks, and then I'm going to do the other eye and then give that time to dry, then come in and add some light. The whole thing, everything I'm doing is touch, push, lift. You see how fast I'm going? Because you can't do it slow. If you do it, the airplane stroke slow, you're going to have a big blob of paint. You're going to have a big blob of paint. What I mean by that is slow. Touch, push, lift. Fast. Touch, push, lift, fast. You want to get it fast. Short, choppy strokes. You want to make the contact and get that brush off the paper. So welcome back. So I had to go out for a while. Chaos was on one of her fits of meowing and she wouldn't stop. So I thought, you know what? I have to go out anyways. Went out, came back. She's quiet now. But now Mia's starting. So hopefully it's not going to be too noisy. We're almost done. What I did is, this being dry, and I saw where a lot of the brown mixture is here. I brought out an extra brush and I want to show you how this works. Well, it's not really show you how it works, but just you know, it does make things a little bit easier. I put out some paints on my palette. Now, I made a mess here. I accidentally put out raw umber, and I had to clean that up. So basically, I'm going to take the blue and the burnt umber. We're going to make our chromatic black. Oh, Mia's gone back to bed. Okay. We should be all right. And when you're using a liner brush, this is what this is. It's a 10/0 liner brush. And you need to really thin down the paint to make it fluid. And what we're looking at doing is you're getting really fine strokes. Now this is on primed paper. You'll get a lot more fluidity on primed paper. So which is what, now basically this paper is primed because there's paint on it. And what I'm doing is you just be using this opportunity to create, you probably can't even see, there you go, just let the wet show. That's the kind of strokes I'm looking at creating. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to build in, so when I run out of this color, then I'll go into a little bit of white on the side with some water, and then go in, and what this is doing is I'm getting wet on wet painting here. Then I'll go over here, do a little bit here. And when I say wet on wet painting, because when I'm doing this, and then I'll rinse my brush, and then I'll load the dark, and I'll come right back into the same area. And what this is doing is I'm getting all these overlapping the fur, because you've got the fur on the back and you got fur, and it's layered. If you have a pet, think of how you pet your animal and think of where the fur, that's how we're painting it. So from the fur on the nose, that what you see here, and you got fur underneath. So that's what we're doing. We're just layering everything together. Now, one thing with animal painting, it's not fast. This is a fast technique, the way I'm showing you to do it, but it's not something that can be done the way you would do an abstract or an impressionistic, but this is a study. I would say the most time is spent getting the paint to the right fluidity. That, honestly, I think is what spending the most time is. And also me not getting in the way, so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm finding now, right in here, gotta make sure this is nice and dark. If you find that what you've got down there is just not dark enough, then go into black. Go into black if you must. And go into the lighter color. And let's say you're going to be gone for a little bit from your painting. You can always put some moisture on there, like some glazing medium or the extender. But just building up the layers. Not going right to the lid because there's a black outline. You can always put the outline back. Go a little bit more white. And the finer the brush, the finer you can get these strokes. Now hopefully you can see those little strokes. And you'll find that there is going to be a way that's more comfortable for you. Find that way. I like pulling the strokes towards me. And really the position that I have my hand in, it all depends on the arthritis. So right now this isn't too bad. See all that nice fur detail? And I'm not using a lot of paint, but it's all about the fluidity. So you make one stroke, see how that goes. And follow the direction of the fur growth. That, I can't stress that enough. You wouldn't paint it this way because the fur doesn't grow this way. The fur's coming out this way. And if you make a stroke that's too broad, then you just go back over with a darker color. So you're going to be using this as your reference material for your study, because there's so many techniques, and basically by copying this is that you're not having to worry about making it look like a photograph. Very limited palette. The fur here is super short. And now let me get some medium. I'm just going to get some medium here. And I'm just going to put a little bit in here. And that should be okay. That should stay wet long enough. Now this will be a little bit more difficult to see because it's going to look wet. Take a little bit of medium into here. So I am going for something a little bit lighter. A little bit of water, not too much water because we have the medium on there. Let's see. It's a little bit lighter. I'm looking at the color, analyzing. A little bit lighter. There we go. Okay. Don't need a lot. I just had to use my finger there just because it was just a little bit too much paint. There we go. That glare is something that's hard to shake. Now that this is dried, I can come back over with a bit of that lighter mix. But yeah, that glare is really hard to shake. And I'm going to take some of that, I'm going to take some of the white and then just going to put a few of those lines in there to make it look like the lid is wet. One thing about the formal painting that I've got planned that's coming up is much larger. So use this opportunity to practice these strokes. Again, if you put too much white on there, easy peasy, you just have to come in with some of the dark. See, now I've got the glare, I can't see. I'll have to tilt this a little bit. Hopefully you can see. Oh, see, that's too much paint. Too much medium, I should say. Too much paint, yeah. There we go. Like I said before, the more layers that you put on, the better. And this is very time consuming. The technique that I'm showing you is fast, but it's very time consuming doing this. Oh, there goes chaos. And get some white paint. And just with the lightest pressure, just putting a little bit of that light in there. As well, right in on that lid here, just on the outside. Okay. And then from here you can go on and build the rest of the painting. I mean, if I just took some of the dark and come in, and I can come in and just put a layer of dark here. This is not part of the exercise, painting the eyes, but it's still the same fur technique. And then you let that dry, then you can come in with the light. Let me just mix up some light. And start from the bottom and then work your way up. So you would typically work with an actual photograph that would reflect the light. Like right now, we don't know what's around this animal, so we don't know, where the light source is. Basically, this is just, they teach you techniques. The formal painting that's coming up, we're working from an actual photograph. And always remembering that the paint dries darker, so you're okay making it lighter, because you can always come in and add a glaze of dark. And right about in the forehead here, you'd have to look at the animal, but then the fur kind of from about here, it goes this way, this way, this way, this way. It's kind of like that middle part, like the crown. I don't know if you guys can hear chaos. But the way the fur here, work it fast and keep that stroke light. Touch, push, lift, touch, push, lift. Just that getting off the stroke. Very little pressure. This takes a lot to master. But it's all about the amount of pressure that you use. See how much faster this is than using this single little brush? I'll just keep going. And you'll eventually find, if you do this technique enough with the big brush, you'll find the brush that works really good, and then keep that brush only for that technique. See how fast that was? You still see where the blending medium is still wet. Turn that. You don't have to paint every individual fur by hand. You don't have to. So once that dries, then to come in, and this is where you've got all those light values in here, all the light strokes. If you come in with a transparent layer of dark, you'll still have those light strokes. They're just going to be a little bit darker. Okay, so I think now what I want to do, I want to put the highlight in. And let me just rinse my brush. I'm going to get clean out the dark that's in the white paint here. Okay, that's dry now. Now we're going to get into the final details. And for hopefully I have enough paint here. Yeah, it should be all right. So let's pick in here for the example. So I'm just gonna use that same dark that I made with a little bit of blending medium. You can even use a little bit of water for this because it's just a glaze. I'm just going to give you an example. I'll do half. Whoopsie. And what this is doing, think of it staining. It's staining the hairs. So you're not having to paint them back over. This is the glazing. You would still use the same strokes. I'm doing this really fast. We'll let that dry so you'll be able to see the difference, but you should still be able to see it. An idea now. See how a little bit darker that turned out? You make a little bit more. I'm going to use burnt sienna this time. There we go. And it's your choice whether you want to use burnt sienna or burnt umber. I'm just kind of going in between the two. Just fan that out. Oh, let's make this a bit darker here. So now I'm just painting that with that stroke, fanning the brush. I'm only going to do the one side. you'll still be able to see the strokes that are underneath. If you were to use like black or something opaque, you wouldn't be able to see it. Now let me get this overlap here. I'll do it here as well. I didn't want to paint this one because I wanted you to see what that looked like. And the more layers that you do of this dark, then the darker and darker it's going to become. You'll eventually not be able to see the strokes underneath. Okay. It's completely up to you how. Well, it'll be all depending on the photograph. So you're going to be using this as your photograph, but you'll be able to take everything that you learned in this lesson and apply it to a formal painting. I want to get the highlights in there. The highlights, I'm going to go with a tiny little brush. I'm going to use white, dry white, and I'm going to just touch that. This is where how you get a lot, when there's a lot of reflection, makes a big difference when you put that highlight in there. Oh my goodness. And depending on what's in the eye, they don't have to be exactly the same. It's all depending on what you're looking at. Okay. Brings it right to life. I'm looking at the monitor to make sure I found that sometimes I'm painting here. I have to make sure I'm in the right spot. Again, dry. Let's make that eye a little bit wetter. It's almost like just a dry brush. Brings it right to life. This is the part that just really turns my crank, is when I put the highlight in the eye. Make sure that that line is not a solid line, it's broken. There we go. And I'm going to look to see if I need to add a little bit more. Because as the white dries, here we are. How's that? Now you can tell now that the dark has dried. You see the dark here versus here. So you see the difference? So by keeping these strokes much lighter and then you glaze over, then you still retain those strokes, but they just become darker. It saves some time as well. So let's see, you learned wet on wet painting, you learned wet on dry painting, you learned scumbling, you learned the fur technique, you learned about using the large round brush flattened, you learned about using a small liner brush, about reshaping the eye, fur direction. I mean, there was so much stuff you learned in this lesson. And with this painting study, so I would highly suggest that you create your double eye study like this, and you work on one eye, then you work on the other eye, then you work on one eye, then you work on the other, and you go back and forth to compare the different things. So like what I did here, compared the glazing so you could see the difference. So you typically wouldn't frame this thing, it's a study, but do, if you can, do maybe 2 or 3 of them, experimenting with brushes, different brushes, experimenting with your different mixtures. So I use blue, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Try ultramarine blue and raw umber. Try ultramarine blue and black. Try phthalo blue. Experiment with all these colors to find what's good for you. Because what I'm painting here is based on my lighting, the reflection of the light coming off my clothes, my surroundings, and you're looking at this through some type of display, computer, or device, so the color is going to be different. So the only true measurement is what's in front of you, what you're doing. So try to do as many exercises as you can to see what feels right, because once you get that feels right, make a note of it, and it's not like you have to commit it to memory. When it comes time to doing the formal painting, you know, the full-size painting with that extra touch of highlight, you won't be spending so much time, oh, what if I tried this brush, or what if I tried this brush, because that's a formal painting. The experiments are for the studies. So we're going to be doing the formal painting, and you want to make sure that you've figured out what colors you want to use and what brush you want to use. And basically the formal painting is putting everything together, because we've already done all the experimenting ahead of time. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so there we go. So with this, all you do is just date it and sign it, make some notes. Myself, I'm going to, on the back, I'm going to put, you know, darker side glazed chromatic black, just to show why it's darker than here, but just to show the difference between the two. All right, that's it. So off to do your homework, and I'm going to clean up because I made a heck of a mess. And I see some paw prints over there, so I think Chaos stepped into my palette. I'll have to go check her paws. All right, so thank you for being with me. I'm sorry that this lesson was a little bit long, but there was a lot to show you, and I would rather show you more than not enough. All right, so until I see you in the next lesson, stay inspired.